Welcome, everyone, back to our study on the Gospel of Mark. We're talking about Mark in terms of entering the kingdom of God. This is lesson 4, and we're beginning in Mark 4:35 tonight. So last week, we started this section that we're calling parables and power, and it's kind of divided just like that, right? Last week, we did the parables, and tonight we do the power. So we've covered the first half, and we saw that in addition to the personal applications that we often get out of some of those parables, that there was this strong connection that Jesus was explaining or demonstrating how he was bringing in the kingdom of God. So what was something that stuck with you about the parables last week? What did Jesus tell us about the kingdom with those parables of the sower, the lamp, the seed? Someone give us a recap or a point of interest.
There was a lot of sowing, and those that hear are basically God or Jesus's family, and those that it falls on deaf ears are not.
Yeah, great points in there, right? So we had a lot of agricultural analogies, right? Like there was a lot of situations that we might not recognize from our daily lives, but they probably would have. So they would know that when you go out and sow your seeds, you don't just dump it on the rock pile. Seeds are valuable. That's not what you do. And so we saw Jesus talking about how he would bring his kingdom to those that other people didn't expect him to, and maybe that other people didn't think were valuable enough. But like you point out, the ones who are God's people are the ones who are willing to listen. He who has ears to hear, let him hear. What else?
He also spoke about the mustard seed in verse 30, about the mustard seed being the tiniest seed, but yet when you put it in the soil, it starts growing.
Yeah, so that all of the birds of the air could perch on the branches, right? Like, so this thing that Jesus is doing, it is unexpected, it is small, it is secret in the story right before that, right? There's a mystery to it. They don't understand. It's not necessarily conforming to their expectations of how it would go, but it will grow. It will become a kingdom movement that will be large and will be enough to change the world and to change the atmosphere around people. So those hearers don't yet understand what the kingdom will be, and yet Jesus is promising, here it comes. It's beginning. It's starting now. So let's continue in this parables and power section. We're going to read Mark 4:35 through 41 to start. So will someone just read that out loud, please?
I can.
Thank you.
On that day, when evening had come, he said to them, "Let us go across to the other side." And leaving the crowd, they took him with them in a boat, just as he was. And the other boats were with him. And a great windstorm arose, and the waves were breaking into the boat, so that the boat was already filling. But he was in the stern, asleep on the cushion. And they woke him and said to him, "Teacher, do you not care that we are perishing?" And he awoke and rebuked the wind and said to the sea, "Peace, be still." And the wind ceased, and there was a great calm. He said to them, "Why are you so afraid? Have you still no faith?" And they were filled with great fear and said to one another, "Who then is that even that the wind and the sea obey him?"
Thank you. Okay, so what do you notice that is interesting in this passage? There's a few little tidbits that strike me. I want to know what strikes you.
He's sleeping during a storm. Jesus is sleeping during a storm.
Right? Why would he be sleeping? He is asleep. Why?
He doesn't have to fear anything.
Yeah, I think that the great point, right? Like he has confidence that is not tinged with fear. I still get scared sometimes in thunderstorms. I am a grown woman, but sometimes when the winds are raging outside, and did yours say, what did yours say? A fierce wind. I've got, what was yours, Erica? The NIV is a furious squall.
Mine's the ESV. It said I clicked too far.
Oh, well, that's okay. I have a furious squall, fierce gale of wind. Like, this is a substantial storm, right? But he is not afraid, so he is asleep. If you're asleep, it's an indication you're probably what?
Tired.
What did you say, Camille?
Tired. Jesus
You know,
was tired.
I think he's probably very tired. Look at this. It says, leaving the crowd behind. Right. We've talked about, till we're tired of hearing about it, about how often these crowds come up, right? It's every single story. It's the crowds, the crowds, the crowds. They're all through tonight's reading as well, the crowds, right? So leaving the crowd behind, he's been there with the crowds pressuring him, right? And they took him along just as he was in the boat. So he has just finished teaching, and just at that moment, he just gets straight into the boat. And what is it like when you have to teach adults or children? What's it like when you have to give a presentation at work or at school? Like, what's the energy expenditure?
Emotionally exhausting.
It is. It's exhausting to teach, to interact with people, right? People are so tiring, right? And so Jesus has been with all of these people, with all of their words and all of their demands and all of their pressures. And it's been constant, right? If we read it and we look for that, the crowds, it's been relentless. And so that we see that Jesus is likely quite exhausted, right? He is tired. And he just steps off of the stage, the shore of wherever lake he's teaching in front of, and onto the boat. And immediately he's like, guys, I gotta sleep. And so he's fallen asleep on the cushion, and he's sleeping through this furious storm. Okay, what other little details are in here?
Yes, the disciples, like, do you still not understand? Do you not see who I am? Like, he's been, since last week, he's been putting himself in the place of God in all of his parables, and they still don't get it.
If they get a star rating for their faith level, how many stars do they have?
1 out of 5 would not
Right.
faith again.
Yeah, no stars. Sorry. Yeah, no stars. They get really scared, and we're going to come to, let's discuss that a little more in a second. Notice that verse 36, not only does he step into the boat just as he was, but what other little detail is here? Who else is with him?
There's other boats with him.
There's other boats. Had you ever noticed that
No.
before? Why would Mark include this detail?
Are the people following him?
Right. That would be kind of funny, right? Like, they never quit. Yeah, I like that. What else might it be?
About themselves, but the other people too.
Okay, this happens in front of other people too, right? We have seen that ancient writers very often handle things quite differently than we do. They may handle chronology or numbers or accuracy in a little bit with a different culture than we do, but very much like us, ancient writers are quite concerned to point to witnesses, right? And it makes sense because this whole telling is a witness, right? This is Mark's testimony of what he's heard from Peter, and Peter's testimony of what he lived with Jesus. And their whole point is to witness to these things that have happened. And so it's not at all surprising that they would point to these other witnesses to say, we are not the only ones who experience this. You find those other people who are out on these other boats, and you'll say that they were in this furious squall, and then suddenly a calm sea, right? So there's an idea that we could maybe point to other witnesses. How are the disciples feeling? How are things for the disciples right now?
Well, they thought
It-
they were scared.
They thought they were scared until they got more scared, right?
Mhm.
Yeah, they were frightened. What else were they besides frightened? Look at verse 37. What are the waves doing?
Swamping the boat.
Yeah, they're wet. They are,
Boys.
what's that?
They're soggy boys.
Yeah, they are really living with the effects of this storm, right? The waves are breaking over the boat. The disciples are soaked. They must be cold and scared. And Jesus is sleeping, and they're like, don't you care, right? And then they respond to his stilling the storm. You guys make a great point, with more fear. So we might think they'd be like, yay, the storm's gone. But why are they so scared? Why? It says they are very much afraid. Why?
This is who then? Is it that even the winds and the waves obey him?
Yeah, who is this? Right? Like, this has shaken them. Why? Why has this shaken them?
Because of their faith.
Yeah, they're not, because they have a 0, right? Because they get 1 star out of 5, right?
Up until now,
Oh, Paige.
that's this size miracle, not.
Okay, so they have seen him do a bunch of miracles, right? They have seen him heal people and cast out demons and heal more people and cast out more demons, right? Those are all people problems, right? And this is something completely different. This is the mark of power over the natural world. Who has power over creation? Only who?
God.
God, who created it. So when Jesus acts in power, it puts him in that category, right? Doesn't Jesus keep doing things that sort of expand or enhance or deepen his claims of authority and his demonstration of those claims? And so that's their question then is, we talked about identity and authority, right? As he does this, they're saying, who is this that even the winds and the waves? It has brought home Jesus' true power to them. And like it's in the way of God. And just like everyone who encounters God in scripture, they're terrified, right? That is the mark of the true encounter with God, is that reverent fear. And so they are quite afraid. And don't we often find that we maybe put unconscious limits about what we expect God to do, right? We say, oh, well, God does these things. But if we see him work in a different way, we're like, oh, no, that's a different category. I wasn't expecting God to do those things. And sometimes we only expect big things, but not small. And sometimes we only expect small things, but not big, right? It's that constant effort to see God for who he is, not, the box that we might put him in. Comments or thoughts on that?
They also, at this time, it was not unusual to have prophets and healers and would-be messiahs. And so they'd probably encountered some people with some good sleight of hand before, or with a good, gospel healing kind of thing. This,
and maybe
this
some
is
legit
next level.
Healings, right? Because yeah.
This is definitely okay, this is for real. There's no way this was a manipulation of, this wasn't a plant in the audience.
Yeah. And I think, sometimes we don't realize that our faith only goes so far until it is challenged that far, right? And so they may have thought that they believed that Jesus was who he said he was all the way until he says another thing, right? And this is a moment. It picks up on that same piece that we talked about where they ask about the parable of the sower, and he says, if you don't understand this parable, how are you going to understand any parable? We get this theme all the way through. We're going to watch it forward from here too, about the disciples' lack of understanding and lack of faith, right? That is going to be a major theme of Mark. And we have to ask ourselves, why is that a major theme of Mark? Is it supposed to be depressing? And I think we're looking forward. Remember, our original reader has seen the faith of the disciples begin to change the world. We see the faith and the understanding they're preaching. The church is moving through the known world. They are dying for their faith. And so as the reader knows what the disciples become, we get to look back and see where they started, so that we, in our small faith, we see that even us, God can use, because look at these dummies, right? Like, God used them and turned them in to these witnesses that changed the world for him and brought in his kingdom as he wanted them to. And so can God use us in our weakness as well? Yeah.
Hey, Deanna.
Yeah.
I just had a thought, thinking back to the cultures that we were talking about in Acts, and how, you go to certain cities and they have these, certain people believe that God is controlling everything, and others think that he's way far away. And this just seems to be a way to address those cultures that may have been around to witness it as well, because it's, no, God is here. He has authority over everything.
What a great point. I love that thought. Yeah. Because the audience for this is going to be an audience with all of this, I guess, breadth later, right? And we begin to point forward to that here. Great point. Love it. And this brings us directly into our next section, right? Okay, let's look at Mark 5, 1 through 20. So they take the boat, right? They get through the storm. They're terrified. They get across the lake, and they step into the region of the Gerasenes. So this is an area that is no longer Israel proper, right? They are not among Jews anymore. Now they're among Gentiles. So we have like this first little tinge of this message going to a wider audience. Someone read for us that section 1 through 20.
I'll read it.
Thanks.
They came to the other side of the sea, to the country of Gerasenes. And when Jesus had stepped out of the boat, immediately there met him out of the tombs a man with an unclean spirit, who lived among the tombs. And no one could bind him any more, not even with a chain, for he had often been bound with shackles and chains. But he wrenched the chains apart, and he broke the shackles in pieces. No one had the strength to subdue him. Night and day among the tombs and on the mountains, he was always crying out and cutting himself with stones. And when he saw Jesus from afar, he ran and fell down before him. And crying out with a loud voice, he said, "What have you to do with me, Jesus, Son of the Most High God? I adjure you by God, do not torment me." For he was saying to him, "Come out of the man, you unclean spirit." And Jesus asked him, "What is your name?" He replied, "My name is Legion, for we are many." And he begged him earnestly not to send them out of the country. Now a great herd of pigs was feeding there on the hillside, and they begged him, saying, "Send us to the pigs, let us enter them." So he gave them permission, and the unclean spirits came out and entered the pigs, and the herd, numbering about 2,000, rushed down the steep bank into the sea, and were drowned in the sea. The herdsmen fled and told it in the city and the country, and people came to see what it was that had happened. And they came to Jesus and saw the demon-possessed man, the one who had had the legion, sitting there, clothed and in his right mind. And they were afraid. And those who had seen it described to them what had happened to the demon-possessed man and to the pigs. And they began to beg Jesus to depart from their region. As he was getting into the boat, the man who had been possessed with demons begged him that he might be with him. And he did not permit him, but said to him, "Go home to your friends and tell them how much the Lord has done for you and how he has had mercy on you." And he went away and began proclaiming in the Decapolis how much Jesus had done for him, and everyone marveled.
Thank you so much. Okay, so they get to the region of the Gerasenes, they step out of the boat, and they are confronted with this man. Now, Jesus has driven out a bunch of demons already, right? A whole series of demons, different stories, different situations. So how does this guy seem to compare?
In a video game, he would be the boss level demon.
Okay, he's boss level demon. Yeah, yeah. It seems like he seems to be more. It seems to be worse. You know, in these other cases, someone brings a child, my son is possessed by a demon, or someone stands up in the crowd. They're still in society. Where is this guy?
Among the dead.
Not life, but death, out in the tombs. Yeah, what were you going to say, Paige?
Oh, I was just gonna say he's hanging out in the graveyard because he wants to be.
Yeah, and what is their like ambition for how they're going to treat him? Like, what are they trying to do for him? Like the best they can hope to do for him is what?
Just keep him
Keep him
restrained.
alive.
Yeah, keep him restrained. Yeah, like maybe he's going to live, maybe he's not. They're just trying to keep him subdued, right? Like chain, shackle, whatever, anything that they can do to subdue him. That's the best that they could do for this man. And in fact, they're ineffective even at that, right? They can't even keep him chained. That's what they've got. And what did the demons say to Jesus?
They say he's the Son of the Most High God.
Yeah, they know who he is, just as the other demons that he has met have known who he is. Yeah, what else? How do they feel about Jesus?
They're afraid. They say, "Do not torment me."
Yeah, they seem to be frightened. What do you want with us? Promise you won't torture us. Like there is a connection here, right? With talking about tormenting, like this previous story where Jesus is accused of being possessed by a demon, and by the power of the prince of demons, he drives out demons, right? Is Jesus on the side of demons, or is he the enemy of demons here?
He's compassionate to the demons.
Well, crazy, right? That's so surprising, isn't it? So we see that they immediately approach him, like obviously they're not like, thanks you guy who's on our side, right? Like he's clearly their enemy. Just as he said, you know, no house divided against itself can stand. Like Jesus is clearly there to defeat evil. And they come to him in that, but then they ask for something and he gives it to them. Compassion, even for demons, letting them do as they request. So strange, so surprising there, isn't it? And we do have to make kind of a modern mind adjustment right here, because our sensibilities would normally be like, but what about the pigs? They didn't do anything wrong, right? So that would be very just sort of not present in ancient thinking, right? They're not going to feel pity for the pigs, especially Jews, right? For whom pigs are an unclean animal, right? No one's going to be like, oh, but what about the poor pigs, right?
But what about the shepherd of the pigs?
Yes, yeah. It's not surprising that these people are alarmed by what has happened, right? This would be a substantial monetary loss for the shepherds or the owners, whether they're shepherd owners or they have a separate owner, a substantial monetary loss, and very alarming, wouldn't it? So they run away, and then they report it, and people come back, and what do they find when they come back?
The man is sane and clothed.
You know what? Where did he get the clothes? Like, were those, maybe he took them off before and he just went and found them. I don't know. Maybe the disciples split up some things and gave him some clothes. He's clothed, he's lucid, and where is he? Say it louder, Paige. I keep losing your audio. I think you said sitting with Jesus. So I picture him sitting. What do you all think? Where do you picture him sitting? It says they came back and found the man sitting there. Where is he sitting in your imagination?
I imagine he's sitting at Jesus's feet.
I imagine it that way too. Yeah, sitting at the feet of Jesus. And I think we get that idea partly because of verse 18. Look what the man does. What does he want to do in verse 18?
He wants to go with them.
Yeah, he wants to go with him. In fact, it says he begged to go with them. So he has previously been completely out of his mind, out of relationship with everyone, in fact, living among the dead. And now here he is, not only dressed in his right mind, but also back in relationship, so that he is restored into relationship with other people and bringing this relationship for Jesus. Jesus brings this man completely into wholeness. The standard of the society that they could offer was like, well, we tried to keep him chained, but we failed, right? But what Jesus has to offer is complete restoration, power combined with compassion, right? He does not take the man with him, but gives him what instruction? Verse 19.
To go tell friends and family.
Okay, he's supposed to go tell. How does this compare to Jesus's usual practice?
Complete opposite. He usually said, don't say a word.
Right, he's told people over and over not to tell, and now he tells this guy, go tell. Why is it different?
Is this person going to a different place? What is this Decapolis?
Okay, a different place. So the Decapolis is that prefix deca is 10. It's 10 cities in this region. So we remember Jesus is normally among the Jews. He's in Israel. The prophets have been preparing Israel for a Messiah for many, many years. But do they, that's a great point too. Let's get to that in a second, Page. So the Jews know to be looking for a Messiah, and they may not know what kind of Messiah to look for, but they know to be looking for one. Would these Gentiles know to be looking for a Messiah? And so the work of the prophets in preparing the way, in making the straight paths, it begins with these healing miracles that Jesus then says, go and tell, right? So the Jews know to expect a Messiah. They're not ready to understand the nature of the Messiah. And because of that, Paige put in the chat, he's not worried about the Jewish leaders here. And I think it's a great point, right? Like the contrast or opposition of like what they would have wanted and what they expected versus what he was is part of what's causing that friction, right? And causing the hostility of the Jewish leaders. None of that's present here. And so I think that's why we get this opposite behavior, right? And later in tonight's story, we're even going to go back to the secret way. Questions or comments?
This reminds me a lot of Mitch, our preacher, his lesson from last Sunday. He was talking about how when Jesus would heal on the Sabbath, the people thought, God forbid everything, that he did something on the Sabbath. But we, in our current day and age, are saying, I can't believe that God did this. I can't believe that Jesus did this. But a lot of times we do not take the Sabbath for granted. We take the Sabbath for granted. Do not use that day as resting.
Yeah, and we saw, even in our March study, we saw that sort of like opposition to him healing on the Sabbath, and yet he says, what is the Sabbath for, right? Is it to do good or to do evil? And so here we see, what's he there for? It's to do good, to bring this good, to bring this wholeness. What is this pair of stories saying together, right? We have the calming of the storm and the healing of the demoniac. What is, like, if you put them together, what do you get?
There's nothing that's outside of the reach of Jesus. There is no one too broken, and there is nothing too frightening.
Yeah. Oh, I love the way you said that. I was thinking of this in terms of the physical realm and the spiritual realm, and that's there. But then think about it in those terms, like nothing too frightening, no one too broken. It touches us, right? It reaches where we are in our struggles. Absolutely. So from here, they go back across the lake, and in 521, they are, guess who's there when they get back? Look, it's a crowd. Jesus has crossed by boat to the other side of the lake, and a large crowd is gathered around him while he was by the lake. Okay. Someone read for us. Well, you know what? Actually, let's just go through it bit by bit here. So verse 22, one of the synagogue rulers, and we get his name, Jairus. Remember, we like, these authors like to give us the details so that we can have these points of verification, especially for readers who are much closer to them in time, came and seeing Jesus fell at his feet and pleaded earnestly for him. My little daughter is dying. Please come and put your hands on her so that she will be healed and live. Well, Jesus goes with him, right? But very soon we get an interruption. The large crowd follows him, and it says they what?
Pressed him.
Yeah, they pressed him, like they are physically on him, right? Like usually, even when I'm in a crowd, nobody is touching me, right? Like that this is an expectation that I have. People should not touch me, even if we're crowded. We went to, when we were in England, we went to Buckingham Palace and did the changing of the guards, which I'm only glad we did so that we could say we done it, because, wow, really boring. And the crowds were like right up on you. They're like, people are touching me. I'm like, stop touching me. But there are people from all cultures there, and there are just different expectations in different places about what's okay. And I was like, these people have to quit like being on me, right? But there they were, and nothing I said made them quit. Here we see Jesus, he's just pressed all around, right? And a woman was there, verse 25, who had been subject for bleeding for 12 years. I think this is such a sorrowful and empathetic description of this woman. She had suffered a great deal under the care of many doctors and had spent all she had, yet instead of getting better, she grew worse. Right? And we know this still happens, right? Such that, the illness is great and consuming, and medical care, it eats up everything. And then it's still no wellness, right? And so here's this woman, and when she heard about Jesus, she came up behind him in the crowd and touched his cloak, because she thought, you notice it tells us what she is thinking. just touch his clothes, I'll be healed. Okay. So, what is she doing? Why does she think this?
She believes he'll heal her.
Okay, this is a matter of belief or faith here, right? So everyone is touching him, but is everyone experiencing a miracle? Like probably they're all there for something. They all see, like if they're pressing in around him, they all probably want something. But are they all getting the thing that they want? Yet she does.
Yeah.
And is this through Jesus's conscious decision?
Well, no, because later he's like, who touched me?
Right? So strange. It seems that this is not his conscious decision. And so what makes the difference? What is the operating factor that creates this healing?
I think her
Her
faith.
Yeah, her faith that he would heal her.
Her faith, like the way that this is written and the way that Jesus frames it, is to put her faith in the driving seat, right, of this event, right? And what did the disciples think?
They're a little flippant, like everybody's touching you and you're asking, like, what?
Right? Like they're like, this question doesn't even make sense. I mean, you can see that everyone is crowding and pressing in on you, right? So, and we've just seen that Jesus is the master of the physical and the spiritual world. So what is this question he is asking? The disciples don't understand it. And then as the reader, for a different reason, neither do we. Does Jesus really not know?
I think he knows, but he's using this as an example of faith.
Okay, so this is something a teacher does, right? They might ask a question and use it rhetorically, right? It's not that they don't know, but that he's eliciting the response that he gets from her. That is one way of looking at it. So what's the other way of looking at it? What if Jesus didn't know? What would that mean?
Well, it feels like in 30, he has an awareness of the power leaving him. That's the interesting thing, I think, is like he knew everybody was touching him, he was pulled upon, but he still knew that like that power had been given.
Yeah, somewhere in his internal power meter, he felt a draw, right? Like whatever that means, right? That there's, if you could feel power go out from you, does that mean there's finite power in that moment? Like it's a very puzzling question.
What if it just means he can't say no to people with faith? He can't pick and choose.
That's kind of a crazy thought. And yet I think we need to put it in the front of our minds because we're going to see
The Syrophoenician woman. We see it.
okay. Even the dogs eat the crumbs from the children's table. That's the story you're referring to?
Yeah.
Yeah, where he says your faith has made a difference. You get your miracle, right? I think, you know, Jesus, we have seen these very strong witnesses that he is equal to God. He's fully God. And yet we also see here, who touched me? I felt power go out from me. Her faith is what did it, rather than his conscious decision. We're getting a little bit of the other side, right? Jesus is fully God, but Jesus is also fully man, so that he is a person who, you know, when he becomes in flesh, when he becomes incarnate, when he was born as an infant, he's not knowledgeable of all things as an infant, right? He cries like other infants. He has to learn to speak, right? Isn't learning a fundamental element of being human, right? Like we have to ask to know things, right? And here we see Jesus living in his humanity as fully man, so that there are other times when Jesus looks at people and knows what they're thinking. So I don't want to underplay that point, but I also see, like, Jesus has, when he becomes a person, he gives up the ability to be everywhere at the same time, right? God the Father is everywhere. He's through all and in all at the same time. But as Jesus is walking around on the earth, he's not. I think, there's a sense of setting aside some of the powers and privileges of godliness to live as we live, to have to ask questions, to know things, to have to be limited, to have to eat, to have to sleep, to be exhausted, right? And so all of those things are kind of wrapped up in these sort of strange little limitations that we're seeing in Jesus here. Thoughts or questions? It's good news, as Hebrews 4 says, like, we do not have a high priest who's unable to sympathize with our weaknesses. Jesus has lived what it is to be human, even some limitations. Okay, so we've seen he heals this woman. He speaks to her with such blessing, right? Daughter, your faith has healed you. Go in peace and be freed from suffering. She gets this commendation, and she gets to be God's family, right? Who are my own people? Who are my mothers and brothers? They're people who listen, who follow me, who believe, right? Her faith has healed her. And while he's still speaking, some men came from the house of Jairus, the synagogue ruler. Okay, what's happened with Jairus's daughter, verse 35?
She's died.
Yeah, they say don't bother the teacher anymore. But verse 36, it says he ignores what they say. And what does he tell Jairus?
Don't be afraid, just believe.
Just believe, right? This word believe is the same word for faith, right? It's belief, faith, or we might call it trust. It's to put your trust in something. And so it's, daughter, your faith has healed you. Don't be afraid. Just have faith. Same word, just believe. And so he proceeds. He goes in. He says, she is not dead but asleep, and they laugh at him. Well, Jesus is speaking of what she's about to be, right? Like, they weren't wrong. They did a mistake that she was actually dead. And they're not, this verse 40, they laughed at him. It's not humor, right? It's derision, right? They deride him for his answer, but he raises her and says, what's he tell them to do?
He tells her to stand up and walk.
He tells little girl, I said, you get up. And then what does he tell her parents to do?
Feed her.
Yeah, get her some food, right? She's all the way back. It's like she's completely back into her natural life, such that she needs sustenance, right? She needs to eat. Right? So she's not a ghost. It's not imaginary. She's going to eat something. And at this, they were completely astonished. And he gave, verse 43, he gave strict orders not to let anyone know about this. Okay. What do you notice about the structure of this section?
What was the question?
What can you observe about the structure of this section? Beginning in verse 21 to 43.
So once again, we have like Jesus going somewhere, and then a pairing of similar events with kind of a similar message and theme.
Yeah.
Wrapping up with, don't tell anybody.
Yes. Yeah. These two things are healings. They're healings of women, a girl and a woman. How are they structured?
Someone asks and he responds.
Yeah, there's definitely that he who has ears to hear, let him hear, like the seeking of Jesus. Notice that we get the intro with Jairus, right? And then we're with the bleeding woman, and then we're back to Jairus. So we have once again this sandwich structure that we keep seeing in Mark, that Mark really loves to do this, right? He puts these things into the sandwich structure to enable him to use both together to make a wider point. What's the wider point he's making here?
Faith.
Faith. Yeah, that's the common point. The importance of faith in the project that Jesus is doing. He says, this healing, this kingdom that I am bringing is done in participation with those who are healed, with those who hear, with those who enter. The faith, this is kind of what Aaron is pointing out, like he's putting the faith into important part of what he's doing. Even though he's God, the people's faith is making a difference, right? And now we're going to see the opposite, right? We read this passage last week because we were looking at Jesus's own people at the beginning and Jesus's own people at the end. So we're back to this hometown story, Jesus's hometown.
Hey, Deanna.
Yeah.
That kind of, it kind of balances out with when he was in his hometown last time and they had no faith. And so he could not perform any miracles.
Right. So that's where we're up to. We skipped ahead and read that last week, but we're back, but in the actual sequence, exactly. That's what we lead straight into. Yeah. So he goes to his hometown and the Sabbath came, he began to teach in the synagogue and many who heard him, this is 6:2 that I'm in, were amazed, right? Same word. Remember before, all the people are amazed and so they're happy with him and they follow him and it's a favorable thing. Well, is it so favorable for the hometowners? Where did this man get these things? They asked. What's this wisdom that has been given to him that he even does miracles? You'd think those would be good things, but the way they're saying it, it doesn't seem like they think it's a good thing, right? Isn't this the carpenter? Isn't this Mary's son and the brother of James and Joseph and Judas and Simon? Aren't his sisters here with us? And they took offense at him. Right? All of these things that should be good, they instead turn into a problem for them. And Jesus said to them, verse 4, only in his hometown, among his relatives, and in his own house is a prophet without honor. So he's quoting, right? He could do no miracles there except lay his hands on a few sick people and heal them. And he was amazed at their lack of faith. So why is Jesus now amazed?
These people who've known him his whole life can't see God at work. Like these people who have taught him in his community what the Messiah should look for and who God is and what it means to be a community and a family and what it means to be a human being, can't see in him God.
Yeah. And they refuse to, right?
They choose not to.
Yeah, they choose not to. They took offense at him. And we're back to Aaron's point, right? Somehow this behavior on this part means he could not do miracles there, right? Like, isn't he God? What happened?
So Brian Pierce's grandmother lived in Littlefield and used to babysit Waylon Jennings. And Waylon Jennings. And every time she'd hear him on the radio, she'd be like, I changed his diaper. Like, how could he be special?
Right. Familiarity breeds contempt.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's what this always makes me think of. Like when I get back around my family and I'm around my aunts and they remind me of, well, that time that you were 7 and you did this thing. And I'm like, I don't even remember. Except that you keep bringing it up.
Right. So that would say like, but they did not actually make Waylon Jennings not special by that comment, right?
That's true.
And yet here we have God who can heal people, and yet God cannot do miracles. What is going on there?
Well, this is before the crucifixion, which fixes things. So there might be some hamstringing in the sin, of the people that, kind of puts him in a place where he doesn't want to help them, or he can't because he can't, or not that he can't, but there has to be a reckoning, and there's not yet.
Or a free will component.
Okay, Paige said
Maybe
in
John
the
Calvin
chat,
didn't know what he
we
was
have to
talking.
seek to receive.
Mhm.
Go on, Gretchen.
I was saying maybe John Calvin didn't know what he's talking about. You have to have a free will, like you have to. God reads
An open vessel.
Yeah, you have to
What,
be
say it again, Terry.
No, I was just thinking, like, you have to be an open vessel. You have to be maybe tapped into, at least be faithful that you'll get it, and not, just you have to be open to it.
Yeah, I think this is hard to talk about, right? Because when we start saying God can't, we get
Right.
it. We're like, wait,
You don't
I
wanna-
feel like
that's
I
a
want to pedal
box.
back from that, right?
Yeah.
But I think
God's a gentleman.
maybe okay, yes, that concept of God doesn't force his way in, right? God, I would say it, God makes it a requirement for human faith and human participation for the work of his kingdom to proceed. And he has chosen to make that a requirement. He didn't have to make that a requirement, but he has. And we're seeing the effects here, so that the faith of this woman could draw that power from Jesus, so that Jesus could say to the man, only have faith and it will make a difference. And so that these people with their little faith, and he says, can't do it. God wants people to do his work. He wants to do his work through people. And so we see what a great witness and opportunity that we have if we are able to participate in that. And what a difficult road, right? Like, maybe God could have chosen just some special people to do his work through, not us regular people, because maybe we're not going to do a very good job. But then we see the apostles, and they were so regular, and they were so weak, and so slow to understand. And we see that no, God can actually use all of these people to do his work. We see that in the next section. We are running out of time, but I'm going to quickly hit this because next week is another long section and we won't have time for it. Mark 6:7 through 6:30 is kind of this mini little smaller section, a little miniature section. And it's another sandwich, right? Let's look at it. Then Jesus went around teaching from village to village, calling the 12 to him. He sent them out 2 by 2 and gave them authority, right, over evil spirits, right? Jesus has been showing his authority. He's been claiming it. He's been backing it up with proof, and he delegates it, right? He hands it off to them. Jesus has authority, not just in himself, but the ability to give it to his people. He gives them these instructions for the journey, right? Take nothing for the journey except a staff, no bread, no bag, no money in your belts. Well, if they don't take any of that stuff, what are they going to do? They're going to have to rely on other people, just like God is relying on us to bring in his kingdom. They don't take an extra anything, right? Wear sandals, but not an extra tunic. If you don't have an extra tunic, that means you have nothing to wrap up in if you're stuck outside overnight. And so they are relying that people will take them into their homes. And he says, when you enter a house, stay there until you leave that town. And if any place will not welcome you or listen to you, shake the dust off your feet when you leave as a testimony against them. This was a practice that Jews would use when returning, this very devout Jews, when they returned to Israel from Gentile lands, they would shake the dust of the Gentile places off their feet before they set foot into Israel, right? These people are in Israel. So we're back to this idea of the people who get to be God's people are the ones who have ears to hear. Let them hear, right? So they went out and preached that people should repent. They're calling people into the kingdom of God, right? They drove out many demons and anointed many sick people with oil and healed them. Okay. Mark interrupts this story for a flashback, right? We're going to finish this story later. Like it would be more obvious if he just finished the story now and then went into his other story, but he doesn't. He stops and he tells another story. And I had forgotten, I was thinking that the story of John the Baptist beheaded actually happened here, but it didn't even happen right here. Mark just chooses to recall it right here, right? He says, King Herod heard about this, for Jesus's name had become well known. And some were saying John the Baptist had been raised from the dead, and that's why miraculous powers are at work. And others said he's Elijah, and still others claimed he's a prophet, like one of the prophets of long ago. Okay, it's all identity, right? It's what is Jesus' identity? Who is he? Is he who he claims? We're not sure. And when Herod heard this, he said, oh, John, the man I beheaded, has been raised from the dead. For Herod himself had given orders for John to be arrested and had him bound and put in prison. And we get the whole story about how, he made the mistake of criticizing Herod, and Herod, the wife nursed a grudge and wanted to kill him. But verse 20, Herod feared John and protected him, knowing him to be a righteous and holy man. When Herod heard John, he was greatly puzzled, yet he liked to listen to him. So we get this whole story about this thing that's already happened with Herod and his brother's wife, and how John says he shouldn't have her, and he puts him in prison. And eventually, because of a girl dances for him, she's very pretty, he promises her anything she wants. She wants John the Baptist beheaded. Herod was protecting John. He knew him to be a righteous and holy man. But verse 26, because of his oaths and his dinner guests, he did not want to refuse her. And so he has Herod beheaded, presents the head on a platter. Famous story, right? Okay. The apostles gathered around Jesus, verse 30, and reported to him all they had done and taught. Mark somehow breaks up the story of the apostles going out with the story of Herod. What's going on with this?
It's kind of pointing out that the power of Jesus is only the power of Jesus. It has nothing to do with John the Baptist. It has nothing to do with anything else on earth.
Okay, it's not a power that's coming from John, right? He's not John reincarnated or something, right?
He's starting to cause problems.
Yeah, Jesus is headed for maybe a similar fate, right? John angered the wrong people, and through it, he was executed. We know Jesus has angered some powerful people, and we know that they're ready to kill him. And so we have some foreshadowing here that Jesus is headed down this path, right? John points this, Mark, the author Mark, points this out early in the process, right? They were ready to kill him. And here we have, he was angry, Herod was angry, and therefore he killed John. What do we expect to happen to Jesus, right? It's pointing us forward. And in just a few chapters, Jesus is going to be specifically predicting his death. 8, 9, 10, we get a prediction of his passion and death, right? So it's pointing forward to that. There's also a contrast between the kingdoms, right? This kingdom that Jesus is bringing is all about compassion and wholeness and doing good, right? Herod is all about pride. Like, he executes someone he thinks is a righteous and holy man because of his dinner guests, right? It's all saving face and holding power, and that's how the kingdoms of the world work. And we see the worldly kingdom is nothing like Jesus's kingdom. right? His power isn't anything like that, and his way isn't anything like that. Such a contrast between the ways of those kingdoms, right? And then why does he put it right smack in the middle of the story of the 12?
Is he showing kind of the growth of their work?
Yeah. And as they grow into the kingdom,
It's
their
dangerous.
it's also dangerous, right? We know as readers later, their end was much like Jesus's end, most of them, right? And as they begin to participate in the kingdom, it's a kingdom that requires sacrifice. It doesn't run on pride and power. It runs on compassion, sacrifice, and faith. It runs on the ways of God, and it is going to point to this kind of end for the disciples as well as for Jesus. So we have these 3 sections in a row tonight that were bracketed for, to bring out the message that the believer is the heir to what Jesus is doing, right? Jesus's power and divinity are such that even the winds and the waves obey him. Jesus' humanity is such that he brings wholeness and relationship and restoration to those around him. Jesus is the fullness of God, and yet he's in this bodily form, readily accepting the limitations of being in one time and place and having to say, "Who touched me?" And he could do no miracles there. And yet all the way through, we're seeing like the promise of what is to come, the goodness and the greatness really shine of what he is doing and what he's bringing his people into doing with him, that we get to be a part of that. I know we've gone a couple minutes over, so I'll wrap up there and we'll switch to prayer time. But thank you all. Good discussion tonight. We are not meeting next week. It's a week off to focus on some item of service. So you have some choices. The Tuesday Bible study group has like an organized plan to send encouraging Valentine themed notes to a variety of people. So you can contact them, and I have contact information for anyone who wants it to participate in that, setup. Or if someone wants to organize for us, we could do something similar. Or if no one wants to volunteer for that, which I understand lives are busy, then take a moment, send something of encouragement, some kind of note, even if it's on email, but paper, mail, present, gift, whatever you have for a teacher, a nurse, someone who needs encouragement to help someone in that way. And that'll be our service thing next week. And then the following week, we will pick up with lesson 5. That section is called Bethsaida to Bethsaida. It's a name of a town. And it's an interesting, the section begins and ends in the same town. So Jesus makes his circuit. The reading is Mark 6:31 through 8:21. Two full chapters there. And we'll talk about how it begins and ends, and those themes will continue in those themes. Thank you, everyone. Do we have prayer requests tonight?
We need to remember Chris, the janitor at UA. His sister passed away from COVID last week.
Thanks. I have that.
I think I mentioned in past studies, I have a good friend from college that was going through some cancer, intestinal cancer, and it had metastasized to her liver. Well, she's been trying other treatments, and she's been given the word that they've kind of exhausted all their options. So she's looking to the end. So her name's Dina.
Thanks, Terry.
Last week I mentioned my student was coming back after a suicide attempt and some inpatient time. Her first day back was really rough. She kind of sat in the back of class and just kind of quietly cried. But by today, she had a really good day.
That's good.
It was, each day you could see a little bit better. You could see a little more spark. Well, she navigated all the kids, and yeah, it was good.
Good. Thank you.